Hello, this is Hector Vladimir. Today is January the 23rd, 2026. I'd like to pick up and discuss briefly the off-grid home system dealing with water heat. Water heat, I don't have to explain how important it is, especially here in the northern hemisphere, in the northern latitudes, and also in the deep southern latitudes as well, where it gets cold basically, where we have the cold season once a year, late fall or autumn, winter, and sometimes early spring. In many areas it gets pretty cold. The air temperature is cold, and also the water temperature, the underground water temperature in pipes for water distribution systems and even in bodies of water get pretty cold, get a lot colder in the winter. So it is quite uncomfortable. I don't have to say that it is quite uncomfortable to take showers, wash, do any kind of activity or use water in any way when it's cold, when it is uncomfortably cold. Also, cold water is not so effective at washing, cleaning. The temperature needs to be raised a bit. It needs to be a bit warm for washing to be effective, or a lot more effective at least. So we need to be a bit comfortable. Oftentimes it is necessary. So we need to have a way to heat the water, to warm the water. And I say warm because I don't believe in heating the water too much. That's just a waste of energy. Using any kind of source, doesn't matter what it is. Using any kind of source, heat source, it is just wasteful to heat the water too much, because you really very seldom will need boiling water or water that is extremely hot, almost to a boil. And a boil is 100 degrees centigrade, quite easy to remember. Not so easy to remember in Fahrenheit, which I really don't recall with exactitude, but I believe it is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want to save energy. You want to be very efficient in heating your water if you're going to be off the grid, especially because you're going to be depending on batteries oftentimes, or in very precious and limited sources of energy. Fuel, electricity, charge, whatever it is that you have as the source is going to be limited. So for that you need efficient water heating. There are a few options that I'd like to mention. Of course, there may be more, a lot more, but I want to focus on the ones that I believe to be quite affordable, accessible, simple. First of them, of course, being solar water heating. Basically, the most simple way of having a solar water heater is to just have a tub, a pool, one of those kid pools or inflatable pools. They also have tub-like pools out there that are just plastic and just laid out in the sun. That will warm up your water before you use it for whatever reason, whether it's for bathing, whether it is for washing, whatever it is, it should be warm. Of course, given that you have plenty of sunshine in your area, you do put the water out during the brightest and warmest part of the day. But of course, this is not always possible. That is a very simple water heater. You want to be a bit more intricate in most occasions, most instances. The next step up from that is basically to have a container. It could be plastic. I've seen it plastic. And this works mainly for, again, warmer areas with a lot of sunshine. It is just a tank or a big water container, and you cover that up with black paint. Black covering, whether it's paint or any type of other coat, but you can spray paint it. You can paint it with brush using effective paint. You want paint to be UV resistant. You want it to be an outdoors paint type. You don't want it to be an indoors paint type, because it's just going to fade out, wash out in the sun and rain. And give it a few coats of that. Of course, that paint will not make contact with the water, since it's going to be applied on the outside, and the sun light is going to warm up that paint and that container quite readily, because black absorbs a lot of radiation, therefore a lot of heat. So that water is going to heat up, and also with the higher pressure, because it is a closed container or an enclosed container. It doesn't have to be completely sealed, of course. It could have a small hole or opening where pressure could be released and vapor, because when the water warms up, it evaporates, it builds pressure, and you want that pressure to be able to be released somehow. If you have ever poured hot water in a small container and then closed it, you will learn very quickly that this container is going to expand and pressure is going to build. And if you remove that lid, you can tell that there was pressure built up. Sometimes the lid will violently just pop off, and you can hear the pressure. Water could spray out. You can even get burnt if the water's hot enough. The container could begin to get soft and even melt if the water's hot enough, and the container is plastic especially. And Even glass container, you don't want to do this because it may burst, explode, and it may cause some problems, injury, mess, etc. That is another option, just the container out in the sun. And then of course you would have to pipe the water to wherever you want it. You can also just get the water with buckets, with a jar, with another smaller container. Whatever method you want to use to channel, pipe, to transport that water to the dispensing area, whether it is a kitchen, a bath, both, a shower, or you can also use that water for washing vehicles, washing items outside, washing your dog, washing a home, etc. Again, warm water is a lot more effective at washing and removing dirt and debris and contaminants. Very effective. Makes a big difference when you wash, for example, a vehicle or a structure with warm water as opposed to doing that with cold water. Another option that is a bit more intricate, more complex, more expensive, a bit more complicated to install, set up, is a
solar insulated radiation tube water heater.
They have those in the market. They have been out in the market for some time, and they have a series of glass tubes with double walls, which are double-walled glass tubes.
They are insulated and connected
to each other, so they readily transport the water. It's basically like a radiator. It's like a conventional radiator, where this tube is probably a serpentine. It's already in a serpentine fashion. It is one single tube, one way in, one way out, but it basically snakes in a serpentine fashion to where the tubes are all exposed to sunlight. And of course, it's double-walled. The inner wall is got a dark or black coat. I'm not sure what they use, but it's resistant to UV, ultraviolet radiation, and it's built to be put outdoors. That's why it's a bit expensive, but I believe it is probably the most effective solar type water heater. You can find out details about those online through the manufacturer, through the seller, and get one of those. It's possible for you to set it up, connect it yourself if you know some basic plumbing. If not, you can hire a plumber, get that connected for you, and it can provide a very reliable warm water. Another option is to have a water heater, conventional water heater with a tank, but you want it to be LPG, liquid propane gas, or natural gas. I like especially the LPG type because I can buy my own tank of gas, control the source of energy, as opposed to natural gas. Natural gas, you have to generally have a subscription, a service set up. You have to have the pipelines already in your home or have them put in by a pretty big company. So it's going to be pretty expensive to put it in, and also the service for it. I hear complaints from plenty of people that have had it or have it currently. They always complain about the cost. Sometimes it is optional to have it maybe half of the year, the cooler part of the year. But I don't believe in that expense, having that expense that's just going to tie you up and have you be part of a grid, which is sometimes, many times, abusively costly, and I just don't recommend that route. LPG, of course, uses gas. It is a gas, and you can control the source. You can, again, purchase the tank, refill the tank at a refilling station. They have them in many of your general hardware stores. The larger ones have refilling stations, such as Tractor Supply. But there are other places also that specialize in refilling gas tanks, LPG. So you want to find out where those places are and make sure that you are able to access those places and make sure the cost is not going to be too high for you. That is a very attractive option. It is probably among the cheaper options other than just getting an electric tanked water heater, which again, I would avoid like the plague because that would just tie you up to the grid, something that I am advocating against here. And it is quite expensive, probably among the most expensive types of water heating is your conventional tanked electric water heater. That's just a power hog. It uses hundreds and hundreds of amps per day. That's thousands and thousands of watts or watt hours per day. That's just going to rack up your power usage and in turn just kill you with your power bill. So I would stay away from that. The last option I'd like to discuss is the tankless water heater. This is probably the most advanced type, probably the most expensive of the water heating types, maybe apart from the solar water heater. And that is because these are a relatively recent technology and they are quite unusual in this area, at least in this southeastern area where I live. And a lot of people just are not familiar with them, with installing them and their availability is not as much as some areas. I've been to some areas in country where they are quite common, but they're not around here, but they are available, especially if you look for them and get them online, and they're not too difficult and not too different from your conventional water heating installation. You may be able to do it yourself. You may be able to install it yourself, again, if you have some basic plumbing skills, if you're crafty, if you're just willing to learn. And this is not only your most advanced and expensive option, most likely, but it is also the most reliable and efficient, meaning that it's going to save you the most amount of money. And because it is tankless, it doesn't store water. It doesn't try to heat up the water constantly because it doesn't store it. And that is one of the reasons why it's so efficient. Not only that, if you get it tankless and gas, that is even more efficient, I believe, and more money will stay in your pocket in the long run. You're going to spend a lot less energy. You're not going to spend hardly any electric energy on it because it uses a very low voltage to operate, and the source itself, main source for the heat, is gas. I recommend you get the LPG type that you can control your source. You can buy your tank, refill the tank, but you can also get it in the natural gas connection utility type and still save a lot of money. Again, these are the most expensive ones of these options that I mentioned, probably, maybe with exception of the solar type heater. But I do recommend the tankless LPG water heater, the most efficient.
For example, the Rheem liquid propane tankless water heaters offer high efficiency, with ratings typically ranging from 0.82 to 0.96 uniform energy factor, UAF, allowing for up to 96% energy efficiency in condensing models. These units are designed to reduce energy costs by heating water only on demand.
That is among the highest efficiencies that you can find out there. Thank you very much.
Hello, today is the 28th of January 2026. This is Hector Vladimir. This is a short episode on living off the grid. I would like to speak today about a technology that's been around for some time that many think is compatible and it is helpful for an off-grid lifestyle. And that technology is electric vehicles.
So I would like to discuss the pros and cons of electric vehicles.
When it comes to an off-grid lifestyle, I am myself an owner of an electric vehicle. I have been an owner of electric vehicle, but I've had two so far. And I've been an owner since the middle of 2016. And I have been a supporter, a believer in the technology, in the cause, in the potential of electric vehicles, of course. But my attitude, my thinking has changed, has evolved. Make no mistake, I am still a supporter of the technology, and I do think it does have a lot of potential. However, it is not like it is portrayed a lot of times, especially when you consider a few factors, one of them being cost, the other one being the cost of energy. One, the cost of the vehicle. Two, the cost of energy. And also the challenges that there are for charging an electric vehicle off the grid. So we'll tackle those three. If I think of any other issues, any other topics to talk about electric vehicles, I'll bring them up. But cost, those vehicles, electric vehicles in general, are more expensive than other types of vehicles, such as the ICE, the internal combustion engine vehicle. Of course, because of many factors, some of them, major ones, are because it is a relatively new technology as far as mass production, and of course, anything that is new requires building the infrastructure, the supply chains, the materials supply chain, and also the facilities, the equipment, the machinery, and also the labor, the technical, scientific, and skilled labor that is required. It needs to be built up. That takes time, that takes a lot of resources, takes a lot of money. So of course, everything that goes into that technology is going to require a lot more money to acquire that technology because of the investment, the heavy investment that has gone into it in a short period, relatively short. So yes, the price has been coming down. In some cases, the price is pretty close, sometimes almost the same as the ICE. By and large, I believe, and I've seen, and I will probably link the evidence for this, electric vehicles are more expensive. That is largely per my experience being an owner. And for example, I bought a 2016 Nissan Leaf back in 2016, and compared to, let's say, a same body style, same size, same everything for another vehicle, and ICE of the same category as far as size and power, I was paying close to $10,000 above what the ICE would cost. I recall paying about $28,000 at the time, and I could have easily gone ICE for $18,000. So the cost is a big challenge, still is, even though today has decreased a lot compared to 10 years ago. But it is still not the same. That is a challenge for an off-grid lifestyle, which I support it to be focused on efficiency. Efficiency, of course, will have to necessarily consider economics or finances. That is one of the major considerations, major factors you want to basically factor in to be off the grid. You want to be able to save money and make more money because of and as a product of the off-grid lifestyle. You will do both, save money and make more money, generate more money, more funds, more income. The other major factor I want to speak of is the energy that is required to keep an electric vehicle charged. From my experience with the Nissan Leaf, it was a small battery it had. I believe it was a 24 kilowatt hour battery. It was relatively small. It had a short range, about 75 miles, maybe a little over 100, maybe 115 kilometers, 120 or so. So it was not much to go on one charge. Of course, I did get quite a bit of use of it. I put about 90,000 miles on it. So I did get my use from it, my utility, my money's worth, I would say. But it was a bit challenging. I did have some, what they call range anxiety. Of course, it had a short range, unlike today's models. They have a much longer range, about double that, if not more, as standard. So I had to adjust. I had to basically make a lot of concessions, adjustments, adjust where I worked, where I went. I could not go out of town. It did not have a fast charger. That's another major factor for being able to go farther than your range would allow, because charging it midway to your destination would take many hours, or would add many hours to your trip. I would say about 4 hours. It took about 4 hours to charge the vehicle in a 220 volt charger, which are not always available, even halfway to your destination. So it was a big challenge, but the main thing I want to focus on, discuss here, is the energy required. Energy is, of course, expensive. Electrical energy is, of course, the electric vehicles charged with electric energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. 90% of the time, if not more than that, it will come from your home, your home's utility electric connection, your electric outlet, whether it's the common 120 volts AC outlet or a more powerful 240 volts or 220 volts AC outlet, which is basically what your dryer plugs into. You have to make a connection for your electric vehicle, as I did, using that 240 volts electric outlet. I put one of those, and that charges the vehicle multiple times faster than a 120 would. So that is the optimal way to charge your electric vehicle. However, it does draw a lot of watts, a lot of power, and that's going to translate to higher electricity bill. As I experienced, my electric bill was much higher than before, and it did not come down from $120 that was back years ago, from 2016 to about when I got rid of the vehicle, when I sold it. It was about 2022, maybe 2023. And my electric bill was quite high. I charged it as soon as I drove home, kept it on charge. So even during the more expensive charging rates, I did charge the vehicle. That's also another factor why it did make a big difference. And when I sold it, not too long after, I got another electric vehicle, being a avid supporter, a fan of the technology, because I did and do believe in its potential. And the battery, of course, was a lot bigger, almost 3 times as big, 2.5 times as big, more or less, a 64 kilowatt hour battery as opposed to a 24. But the charging cost almost tripled. Of course, a larger battery is going to draw a lot more current for a lot longer. And this vehicle, when I charged it, I did my calculations at home, and it was taking about 20 to 30 kilowatt hours each charging session. Of course, it was not being charged from 0 to full. This was about half of a battery. It would take about that much energy, about 20 to 30 kilowatt hours. And if I was to charge the battery completely, I would think it would be about twice that, maybe about 60 kilowatt hours. And just imagine if you did that every couple of days, every other day, or even daily. That is a lot of kilowatt hours. Yes, there are strategies to lower or to minimize the amount of energy that you do consume, the rates that you pay for that energy. Of course, the rates change depending on the time of day, the season, etc. For power companies, they claim this is for basically to discourage people from using too much energy and using too much energy when it's high demand. So they have these different rates at different times, different seasons. So you have to very closely watch that if you want to minimize the amount of money that you pay your power company, especially if you charge an electric vehicle. Even doing that, even being very careful as far as when I charged, how much I charged, I was paying a lot of money when it comes to my utility electric bill. And a lot of states, such as the one I live, the backward state of Georgia, they discourage very much the ownership of electric vehicles, mainly by taxing the heck out of them. You have to pay a hefty tax. I call it a punitive tax that you pay every year. Not once, but every year. You have to pay this fuel tax, they call it, which is, as I speak, over $230 above and beyond what you would have to pay for a common, conventional ICE vehicle, which I believe to be completely unfair and uncalled for and abusive, because you should not be curtailed, punished. You should not be taxed for trying to save the environment, the planet, for trying to decarbonize the very polluting and obsolete fossil fuel industry or system that we live under. Trying to do something good for the environment should not be punished. But that is exactly what they're doing. And these powers that be, these entities that are doing these, they damn well know that's the goal. That is the end goal, to discourage the technology, to discourage the spread of the technology, to slow it down at the very least, so they can keep selling ICEs and keep selling gas in the end. The ultimate thing is for them to keep making record profits every year by selling fossil fuel products, especially gasoline. That is the end goal, I wholeheartedly believe. But they try to cover it, they try to mask it by calling it a fuel tax, saying that you must pay the fuel tax that every other ICE owner pays when they go to the pump. But it is a cover, it is a mask, and it is clear that this is so because they are also trying to tax the charging of EVs now. On top of that fuel fee, now they're trying to tax each kilowatt hour that you put in your vehicle using fast chargers. There are fast chargers out there that charge a lot faster than your home's 220 outlet would. Now they want to tax that. There are many states, including Georgia, that have bills, that have senators and people in government trying to pass bills into laws, make bills into laws that tax these fast chargers. That is on top of the already abusive tax that they have. So that is a big challenge. The cost of energy, the cost of charging, especially for those of us that would like, that plan, that dream, that wish to live off the grid, meaning that you would not have a utility connection. Once you don't have a utility connection, charging an electric vehicle becomes a daunting challenge. It is, to my estimation and experience, extremely difficult. I don't want to say it is impossible, because very few things are that are technical, that are physical, but that is a daunting challenge. One that I'm yet to see or to hear about someone has done, charging their vehicle using solar energy, for example, and batteries. Again, yes, it is possible, but you would need basically a farm of solar energy, solar panels, a solar field, a farm of hundreds and hundreds of solar panels dedicated to charging a giant battery, multiple times the size of the one installed in your vehicle. Necessarily so, it would have to be, at the very least, double, if not triple, the size of the one in your vehicle. Because a fast charger is basically transferring the charge on a big battery. This is an off-grid fast charger. Of course, you don't have a connection to a power plant that's generating energy with hundreds of amps and thousands of volts all the time. You have to have a source, and the source is disconnected from any kind of power plant if you're going to be off-grid, and this is going to be your battery. Your source is your battery. Of course, the solar field that you would need to keep those batteries charged is just another source to keep the battery full, to keep the battery charged. So that battery, when you hook it up to your charger in your vehicle, is going basically to drain into the battery in your car. The amount of watts that vehicle is going to require, which I have measured to be over 1,500 watts continuously. I'm talking about for hours. You have to keep up 15, perhaps almost 2,000 watts of continuous power going into that vehicle charging. You have to keep that up. And for that to happen, your battery would have to be pretty big. I have not calculated exactly how big, but the energy requirements, just by thinking of it and by my modest knowledge of electricity, it would have to be pretty big to maintain that kind of power draw drainage for that amount of time. It would probably be gigantic. You have to take into consideration also the loss factors, the power losses that your inverter is going to have. It's going to have to go through an inverter because your vehicle is probably not going to be supercharging. It's just going to be charging at a slower rates of maximum 220, if not 120, which takes about a dozen hours, 12 plus hours to charge a battery fully, if not longer than that. A big battery probably would take maybe about 20 hours to charge with a 120 outlet. That is probably what you want to go with if you're going to be running it with batteries. Of course, you may have a DC charger, which is your fast charger, level 3, sometimes called supercharger, but that would be prohibitively expensive. I have looked at some of the prices. We're looking at over $50,000 for a DC charger. This is a low-end, not too fast, run-of-the-mill DC charger that charges perhaps maybe about 50 kilowatts, 60 kilowatts
per hour.
That's pretty fast. In comparison, your 220, 240 volt outlet charging for your vehicle, which is level 2, that could take you to about 7.5, maybe 8 kilowatts per hour. That is your speed of the charger. They measure it in kilowatts per hour. So 8 kilowatts per hour. That's how much you would charge per hour. So if you're going to put, let's say, 24 kilowatts at 8 kilowatts per hour, that would take you 3 hours. If you're going to put 32 kilowatts into your vehicle with an 8 kilowatt charger, that would take 4 hours, and so on. So there you can see, just by these small factors, details, how difficult it would be to charge a vehicle off the grid. It is pretty much not feasible. It is pretty much prohibitive. It is not impossible, but it is economically, financially prohibitive, especially for people of low income or people that are trying to save as much money as possible. You can't just go out, if you're living off the grid or wanting to live off the grid, minimize your utility payments and minimize your expenses. You can't just decide to spend $100,000, $200,000 on a huge lithium-based battery, a super expensive charger, and also a solar field, which you need the land, the equipment, you need the solar modules or panels, you need all kinds of safety equipment also, and the batteries, the battery bank, which is basically a battery system that you have to have. You have to have it air conditioned, temperature regulated, with very expensive monitoring systems, connections. These batteries are somewhat volatile, so you have to watch them, maintain them, keep an eye on them. Can't run them too hot, can't let them get too cold. So they are finicky, they are touchy, and they do require maintenance. You can't just install it and forget it, as many people think. So it is doable, yes, but it is doable in large scale.
Yes, several companies use large stationary or mobile battery systems to charge electric vehicles without being connected to the utility grid, often storing energy from solar or wind. Companies like Spark Charge provide mobile, battery-powered DC fast charging, while Beam Global offers solar-powered, off-grid charging stations with built-in battery storage.
Again, this is doable, but it is very difficult for them to be completely off the grid. Perhaps he claims that they are off-grid. In fact, they may just use a utility connection and they may offset whatever power they use with solar panels. It's all about labeling. They may call that off the grid, but in reality it's just a utility connection that feeds into the system. They factor in the time that the system spends without charging, without being used, and that time, perhaps during the sunlight, the solar panels feed the energy that was used during a charging session, for example. It feeds that energy back into the grid or the utility grid. So it is pretty much offset. But that, sadly enough, is not an off-grid system. An off-grid system, by definition, should not have a connection to utilities. And again, that is extremely difficult. Those are a few of the factors, challenges that make electric vehicles not so much of a off-grid technology. That is my opinion. Many people may have different opinion, but as an avid supporter of electric vehicles, have been and I still am, it is difficult for me to say this, but evidence trumps feelings and opinions. And the evidence that I have gathered so far tell me that the expense and the infeasibility, the inability for electric vehicles to be charged off the grid makes them not, I repeat, not an off-grid technology. Sadly, it is difficult to say, but I believe wholeheartedly this is a fact. This is the truth. Having said that, you can make it work, as I have. I have saved on electric energy and also I have owned an electric vehicle. I believe the cause of saving the environment, minimizing pollution, and furthering supporting a cleaner, better, more efficient, safer, advanced, automated, electrified technology. Those things, I think, are worth the efforts needed to make the technology work for you in a off-grid lifestyle. Again, I've made it work, truly have made it work for over 10 years now. How have I saved money? Basically, that is the number one rationale for you to have an electric vehicle is because you want to save money, not only to save the environment, but to save money. Gas is expensive, ICE vehicle maintenance is expensive, so you want to minimize or get rid of those, cancel those. So that is the main reason why I was so attracted to the technology when it first came out, when the Nissan Leaf came out. It was the potential of me not buying a drop of gas ever again. And I saw the potential in that, in the savings, the money savings, as undeniable. I did the numbers and I remember saving in the amount of time that I used the Leaf, I want to say about $7,000 or more in gas savings. Of course, that is without taking into consideration the extra money that I paid to the utilities. But even then, it would be probably about $5,000 for about 90,000 miles driven. So yes, it was worth it. I put in my pocket $5,000 worth of savings, money that did not go into a gas pump or a gas station. That is money that stayed in my pocket. It is money made. Yes, it took 90,000 miles. Yes, it took all that time. But I believe in the end it was worth it. There are also ways for you to save even more. Again, watch the time that you charge your vehicle in. Look at your rates. Call your electric company. Go to their websites. Find out what the rates are, at what time, and which seasons, and basically charge your electric vehicle outside of the high rates, hours, and seasons. It is possible. It is something that you can do. Most electric vehicles have automatic settings where you can set the vehicle to charge automatically at a certain time window, start charging and stop charging at a set time window that you program in, you set in. It is pretty easy to do. Those vehicles, you just leave them plugged in and they will start charging at the time that the power rates, the electricity rates are the lowest. For this area, in the summertime, during the warmer temperatures of the year, the cheaper rates are in the middle of the night, in the very early hours of the morning. That's when you want to set your vehicle to charge. And in the winter, the colder months, it's during the day. The cheaper rates are during the day. So that's when you want to charge your vehicle in the winter here in North America. Of course, your region, your country, your nation could be different, could be about the same, could be slightly different. So make sure that you do follow that, and also make sure that you do know the rates of your power company. Your power company is the one that decides on the rates, the times, and all the fluctuations with that. So you have to look for that. It should be on their website. Another way for you to save big time on electric costs while charging your electric vehicle is basically by charging free, charging for free. You could do this. There are a decreasing number, sadly enough. They are decreasing in number, disturbingly enough, but they are still out there. Find them. There may be some in some parking areas, some parks. Some cities do provide chargers, probably not the faster types, but the mid-speed or level 2s, you may still find those. I recall they have one here nearby in a city right in the middle of downtown. They used to have one. I used to work around the area before. And I used to go and plug in and charge there for 30 minutes, 40 minutes a day when I could. And it was free of charge. And you may have a company that provides charging at their parking lot. I remember seeing a company here in Georgia, a company that manufactures light fixtures. and they provided chargers for free to their employees in their parking space. They had about 4 or 5 parking spaces with chargers. You may take advantage of that, and if you work at a place like that or near a place like that, you may park in their place. Security may overlook it. They may not have security. They may not care that you don't work there if you in fact don't. And park and charge there. It could be possible. Also, there are many hotels that have chargers for quote unquote their customers, their guests, and as I have done, you may be able to park there and be overlooked, be ignored, and not be a big deal, and get many kilowatts of charge from those spots, those places. That is another thing to consider, free charging. There may be other ways which I will not entertain or go into for you to charge completely free, and those are ways how you can make it work, how you can make electric vehicles work for a off-grid lifestyle, for an off-grid situation. You, anyone wishing to live off the grid, I believe, again, the cause, the purpose of the electric vehicle technology is not necessarily and or entirely to save a few bucks. You must also consider that it is saving the environment, it is a cleaner technology, and even if you have to keep an electric connection at your home just for your electric vehicle and nothing else, I believe it is still worth it. Go ahead and keep that connection if it is only for that electric vehicle, so you can save on gas, so you can quit supporting the fossil fuel industry. And I will leave you with this thought that electric vehicle ownership is also about turning your back to the fossil fuel industry. Remember that electricity, as expensive as it is getting, as expensive as the rates are in many areas, it is increasingly clean, green, renewable. There are many solar fields, one of which I work in right now, popping up that are being built all over the world. They are getting larger, they are getting more numerous, and these are renewable sources of energy that produce electricity, some of which could be feeding the electricity that goes into your electric vehicle. That is another big reason why electric vehicles are worth it, even though they're not necessarily an off-grid technology. If you can at all afford it, if you can at all make it work somehow, then I think you should, because of these reasons, these factors. They use electricity, yes, but they also, that electricity source is increasingly renewable, and again, it is a step away from the fossil fuel industry. It is turning your back, denying your money, hard-earned money, to the filthy, corrupt, polluting, harmful fossil fuel industry. Thank you very much.
Just to summarize, I covered topics on the basics of life, mainly how to live off the grid and still satisfy the life's basics or needs, which are the use of water, of course, collecting, storing, using, maintaining water, food, again, growing food, whether it's farming animals or growing plants, fruit trees or vegetables, or any kind of nut or root plant that may give you food. I've covered some techniques for that, some methods, and some technologies, especially technologies for storage, methods for preservation, etc. I've also covered energy, the all-important energy, how to harness it, mainly electrical energy, how to use it, how to remain disconnected, how to disconnect legally and freely. Also, I have covered the off-grid options for telecommunications. I've gone through a few options to give you, to offer to you as ideas so you can develop on them. Of course, I'm not going to give you the exact details on how to. I have not done many of the things that I recommend or offer. Of course, I can't do it all when it comes to living off the grid, but I have done several of the options mentioned here for each category, at least several. For water, I have collected and used water, rainwater. I have used and collected food when it comes to growing food, even growing farm animals. I have delved into that. I have delved, of course, into alternative or renewable energy. That is probably the focus of my efforts. And I have also delved into telecommunications, free options for telecommunications, specifically radio telecommunications, and also free networks, Wi-Fi networks, open networks, etc., as well as the governmental help that is offered. I have some experience with that as well, which basically is a free service that offers telecommunication services. And that is it for this series.
Thank you very much for listening. I have covered a few topics, mainly techniques and some technologies on how to live off the grid. Of course, there may be a lot more techniques and technologies. I have only mentioned a few, of course, because of time constraints and also because I've developed many others, including the ones I talked about here in other shows and other chats. So I will put the link for the other shows that it mainly speaks about some of the topics that I covered here, again, which are technologies and techniques on how to live off the grid. Thank you very much for listening. That is the methods and technology for off-grid living. This has been Hector Vladimir. Today is the 6th of January 2026. Thank you very much.
Vaya para allá. Vaya para allá.